Today's topic is a rather unique route, in the sense that it is semi-fictional, set in Japan, and comes with some interesting story-based scenarios. These are my 2 cents on the story of Forest Rail. This add-on is getting on for 10 years old now, having been released on the 19th of January 2015. It is still available from Steam for $30 New Zealand dollars at full price, or you can get it from the Just Trains website if that's what you prefer. In any case, Union Workshop are the developers behind this pack, which is all about a route referred to as the Matsuhara line. It's mostly based on the real-life Furusato Ginga line, albeit with fictional towns and station names. The track gauge is 1067mm, or 3-foot 6-inch gauge, the same as it is in my home country of New Zealand. The scenarios are unique in the sense that, instead of being focused on regular services, like most default scenarios, they're actually used to tell a story. The story is about a university graduate named Izumi Chisa getting a new job where she helps to run services on a recently reopened, albeit cash-strapped, railway line, although it's certainly not the kind of line she was expecting. 2 additional scenarios are available with the Just Trains version as standard, and people who got the Steam version can download those extra scenarios from Steam Workshop. They continue the story a little bit, but unfortunately the story doesn't really have a proper ending. Setting the story aside, there's not a whole lot of content included here, certainly not where the rolling stock is concerned anyway. You only get 2 vehicles with the route, namely the Kiha 720 railbus and a Kiha 750 railcar. The latter confuses me somewhat, because the real thing is actually designated as Kiha 07. As for the Kiha 720, this is apparently a modified Toyota Coaster B20, and it's interesting to note that she retains a destination display from her days in Hong Kong. I only know where the sign comes from because it mentions the famous, albeit long-closed, Kai Tak Airport. I don't really know how to describe it, but there's just something oddly relaxing about driving on the Matsuhara line, although some of the curvature and gradients are a bit hairy. The trouble is that the gradients can get as steep as 1 in 20, and the Kiha 750 often struggles to get up these steeper inclines without losing too much speed. Meanwhile, the line out of Matsuhara itself is double track as far as Numahara, where the 2 lines diverge from each other. One line goes to Sawakokawa, and the other goes to Rintenjo, with the total route length being around 135 kilometers. The line to Sawakokawa is more mountainous, and has more severe speed restrictions than the line to Rintenjo. I especially like driving on this route with the season set to spring, because that's when you get the cherry blossom trees flowering, and to add to the immersion, the leaves are often blown about by the wind. Things to look out for as you drive along include the onsen, or hot spring house, at Numahara, this Buddhist temple next to the railway line at Uenamu, and floating water lanterns if you're driving at night. But as far as I can tell, the lanterns have to be placed one at a time in the scenario editor, and they don't appear automatically in scenarios depending on the season. Due to the route's hilly nature, it's important to keep an eye on the railcar's speed, even if it means having less time to admire the scenery. Besides the railcars that come with the route itself, you could also run the Kiha 130 and a Kiha 40 railcars on the Matsuhara line too. For reference, those units are included with the Hidaka Main Line and Tadami Line add-ons respectively. At present, there are no Japanese steam locomotives in Train Simulator, which disappoints me despite barely knowing anything about them. There are some fueling facilities for steamers present on this route, but they just go unused, and the lack of any Japanese locomotives and wagons means you can't really do anything in the other freight yards. While we do have at least 4 3-foot 6-inch gauge steamers in TS, 3 of them are from New Zealand, while 1 is from South Africa. Thinking back to the Kiha 750, while I think this is a decent railcar overall, there are still a couple of issues I have with this thing. Namely the rather raspy engine sounds and the horn audio not looping for however long you hold down the spacebar. Instead, you always get the same short blast. Meanwhile, in this daytime scene, we see a railcar passing the junction for the abandoned branch up to a coal mine at Matsuishi, a station on the branch to Sawakokawa. Meanwhile, the Kiha 720 is similarly easy to drive as the Kiha 750, but the rolling resistance on this thing is terrible. Even when coasting along a level track, or down a gradient around 1 in 100, with all the brakes released, it feels like this thing slows down more than she should. I don't really know what else to say about the Story of Forest Rail add-on, so here's a brief summary of the whole thing to close out the video. The story-based scenarios put an interesting spin on what I've come to expect from Train Simulator DLC, and even when you're not playing through the scenarios, this is still a delightful route to potter about on, but be mindful of the speed limits and short platforms. Despite the very limited rolling stock offering, and the other issues I've mentioned, I would still go so far as to give the Story of Forest Rail an 8 out of 10.